The rain was coming down in thick sheets, hammering against the windshield of my car as I navigated the slick, congested streets of Chicago. My calloused hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the leather groaned under the pressure. Just a few minutes ago, my phone had rung with the kind of news that instantly makes the world stop spinning. My father Harrison, who had just turned 102 years old last month, was being rushed to the emergency room. My chest felt incredibly tight, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios as I hit the speed dial for my wife Monica. When she answered the phone, her voice was trembling thick with heavy tears and panic. She told me she was already at the hospital, sitting right next to his bed, holding his fragile hand. She begged me to drive safely and not to rush through the dangerous storm, but as I listened to her crying, my blood ran absolutely cold. You see, I have spent my entire life building an $80 million logistics empire from the ground up. My brain is hardwired to calculate time, distance, and complex variables instantly. Monica had texted me from a downtown spa just 20 minutes ago. In this severe storm with this gridlocked traffic, it was physically impossible for her to be at that hospital already. She was lying to me, and I was about to find out exactly why. My name is Richard Stanton. Most people in the industry just call me Rick. I am 70 years old, and for 4 decades I have controlled massive supply chains spanning the globe. I track massive freighters across volatile oceans, manage extensive fleets of transport trucks across the country, and know exactly how long it takes to move a critical shipment from point A to point B down to the very last second. So when Monica's tearful, shaking voice echoed through the Bluetooth speakers of my car, my mind automatically began mapping the route and running the numbers. "I am here, Rick. I am right here with him," she sobbed, her voice breaking perfectly. I could hear the faint, rhythmic beeping of what sounded like a hospital heart monitor in the background of the call. It was an incredibly convincing performance. Flawless, even. Monica is 52 years old, my second wife, and we have been married for 8 comfortable years. To the outside world, she is the absolute picture of elegance and unwavering devotion. She always made a massive show of caring for my elderly father, adjusting his heavy blankets, bringing him his favorite chamomile teas, and ensuring his guest house on our sprawling estate was perfectly maintained at all times. "How is he doing?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain completely steady, masking the sudden sharp spike of adrenaline coursing through my veins. "He is unconscious," she replied, her voice hitching with expertly timed emotion. "The doctors are rushing around everywhere, checking his vitals and putting lines in his arms. It happened so fast, Rick. I found him collapsed on the floor of the guest house and called the ambulance immediately. I rode in the back with him. Please, honey, the roads are absolutely terrible right now. Do not rush and get yourself hurt. He is stable for the moment, and I promise you that I am not leaving his side." I stared through the sweeping wiper blades at the sea of red taillights blurred by the torrential rain. My mind processed the data she was feeding me, separating the high emotion from the cold, hard facts. Fact 1, the exclusive spa Monica frequents every Tuesday is located deep in the heart of the financial district. Fact 2, City General Hospital is on the complete opposite side of town, miles away from her location. Fact 3, this severe storm had completely paralyzed the interstate, turning a normal 20-minute drive into an agonizing hour-long crawl. If she had actually found him at our estate, in the quiet suburbs, she would have had to drive all the way home from the downtown spa, wait for the paramedics to arrive, and then ride with him all the way back into the city. The timeline was not just highly improbable, it was completely, undeniably fabricated. Yet the rhythmic beeping continued in the background of the call. Steady, unwavering. Too rhythmic, almost mechanical, like an audio track playing from another device. "I am about 10 minutes away," I said forcefully, merging into the fast lane, completely ignoring the blaring horn of a massive passing transport truck. "Take your time, Rick. I love you so much," she whispered, ending the call with a soft click. The luxurious cabins of my car fell deathly silent, save for the relentless, heavy pounding of the rain against the glass roof. I did not scream in frustration. I did not violently slam my fists against the dashboard. Anger is a foolish luxury you simply cannot afford when you are actively trying to solve a high-stakes problem. Instead, a chilling absolute clarity washed over my mind. If Monica was not at the hospital, where on earth was she? And more importantly, what was that fake beeping sound supposed to cover up? My father, Harrison, is not just a fragile old man. He is a decorated veteran of the Second World War. He stormed and survived the brutal sands of Omaha Beach. He survived the bitter hardships of the Great Depression. He painstakingly built me into the disciplined man I am today, teaching me early on that a man is only as good as his strict attention to the smallest details. Despite his advanced age, his mind remains as incredibly sharp as a newly honed razor, even as his physical body has slowly and cruelly betrayed him over the last few years. The agonizing thought of him lying completely alone in a cold, sterile hospital bed, while my wife put on a theatrical, calculated performance over the phone, made a dangerous, violent, protective instinct flare up deep inside my chest. I pressed my heavy foot down firmly on the accelerator. The expensive tires gripped the wet asphalt, pushing the car forward through the deluge. I had spent 8 long years providing Monica with a life of absolute uncompromised luxury. Custom designer clothes, endless tropical vacations, an exclusive credit card that never declined no matter the purchase. I even gave her son Trevor, a 32-year-old man who stubbornly refused to build his own independent life, far more second chances than he ever rightfully deserved. I had generously opened my home, my wallet, and my entire life to them. In return, I expected basic loyalty. I expected simple honesty. But as the glowing red emergency room sign finally pierced the thick gray sheets of rain ahead of me, I knew with absolute certainty that I was walking into a hidden war zone. I just did not know the specific rules of engagement yet. I pulled aggressively into the hospital drop-off zone, throwing the heavy car into park and tossing the keys to a startled valet. The freezing rain soaked through my coat instantly as I sprinted toward the sliding glass doors, ready to face the storm waiting inside. My father taught me to never let an enemy see you bleed. Today, Monica would learn exactly what happens when you cross a man who controls every single variable. The sliding glass doors of City General Hospital parted, and I stepped out of the freezing rain and into the harsh fluorescent glare of the lobby. I did not pause to catch my breath or shake the water from my heavy wool coat. At 70 years old, my knees sometimes ache when the damp cold sets in, but tonight, adrenaline completely overrode any physical discomfort. I bypassed the main reception desk with long, purposeful strides. Decades of running a massive logistics empire have trained me to command any room I enter, to bypass the bureaucracy and go straight to the source of the information. My wet leather shoes squeaked against the polished linoleum floor, a steady, rhythmic sound that echoed down the long, sterile corridors. I followed the brightly colored lines painted on the floor, my eyes fixed solely on the bold red letters spelling out Intensive Care Unit. The hospital smelled of bleach, bitter coffee, and that underlying metallic scent of sickness that you can never quite wash out of your clothes. Nurses and doctors moved around me in a chaotic but organized ballet, a human supply chain prioritizing trauma and saving lives. I reached the heavy double doors of the ICU and pushed through them. The air in here was colder, quieter. The frantic energy of the emergency room was replaced by the low, steady hum of life support machines and the soft whispers of medical staff hovering over glowing computer screens. I walked directly to the central nurses' station. A woman in dark blue scrubs looked up from her charts. Her name tag read, Carla Jenkins, Charge Nurse. She had the tired, sharp eyes of someone who had seen every possible family tragedy unfold in these sterile hallways. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low, but laced with absolute authority. "I am looking for my father, Harrison Stanton. He was brought in by ambulance a short while ago. I need to know his room number, and I need to find my wife, Monica Stanton. She should be sitting with him." Nurse Carla Jenkins frowned, her fingers pausing over her keyboard. She typed my father's name into the system, her eyes scanning the data on the screen. The frown on her face deepened into a look of genuine confusion. "Mr. Stanton," she said softly, leaning forward across the high counter. Your father is in room 4. He was brought in by the paramedics about 45 minutes ago. He is currently stabilized, but his condition is extremely critical. She paused, looking around the quiet, empty waiting area behind me. But sir, there is no Monica Stanton registered as a visitor. In fact, you are the very first family member to arrive tonight. The words hung in the cold, conditioned air between us. For a fraction of a second, my brain completely rejected the information. It simply did not compute. Are you absolutely certain? I asked, my tone sharpening involuntarily. My wife called me just 15 minutes ago. She explicitly told me she was sitting right beside his bed, holding his hand. Nurse Carla shook her head with absolute certainty, her professional demeanor softening into a look of deep sympathy. I am positive, Mr. Stanton. I have been stationed at this desk for the last 6 hours. No one goes into room 4 without passing me. The paramedics wheeled your father in alone. We have been trying to reach his emergency contacts since he arrived. You are the only person who has come through those doors. I slowly turned my head and looked at the small, brightly lit waiting area adjacent to the nurse's station. There were 5 uncomfortable-looking chairs lined up against the wall. Every single one of them was completely empty. The lie was confirmed. It was no longer a suspicion born out of calculating traffic delays. It was an absolute, undeniable fact. Monica was not here. She had never been here. So where exactly was my loving, devoted wife? And how on earth did she manage to fake the rhythmic beeping of a hospital heart monitor during our phone call? My mind raced, pulling apart the intricate threads of her deception. She must have used an audio track, a downloaded soundbite played on a secondary device to set the perfect stage for her panicked performance. It was a calculated, premeditated manipulation. You do not just spontaneously decide to play hospital sound effects during a medical emergency. You plan it, you execute it, and you only do something that meticulously deceptive if you are desperately trying to cover up something incredibly dark. My chest tightened, not with the familiar ache of an old man's anxiety, but with the cold, dense pressure of mounting rage. She had left him alone. She had found my father, a frail 102-year-old man, in a state of critical medical distress, and instead of rushing to his side, she had abandoned him to the paramedics and gone somewhere else. Where do you go when your husband's father is fighting for his life? What could possibly be more important than the theatrical display of devotion she had maintained for the last 8 years? I thanked Nurse Carla with a curt nod and walked heavily toward room 4. The heavy glass door slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. I stepped inside, and the sight before me nearly shattered the iron control I had been maintaining. My father Harrison looked impossibly small amidst the tangle of plastic tubes and monitoring wires. The man who had survived the brutal beaches of Normandy, the man who had worked 2 grueling shifts at the steel mill to put food on our table, was now reduced to a fragile shell. The rhythmic mechanical hiss of the ventilator filled the room, forcing air into his weakened lungs. His skin was pale under the harsh hospital lights. I walked over to the side of his bed and took his cold, calloused hand in mine. It was the same hand that had guided me and taught me to be a man of unwavering integrity. He was entirely alone when he arrived here. While he was surrounded by strangers fighting to keep his heart beating, the woman who had sworn to protect this family was off executing a hidden agenda. I looked down at his deeply lined face, feeling a profound sense of guilt wash over me. I had brought Monica into our home and funded her extravagant lifestyle. I had trusted her to care for him. I pulled a chair close to the bed, refusing to let go of his hand. I am right here, Dad, I whispered into the quiet room. And I swear to you, I will uncover whatever is happening. I did not know exactly what Monica was doing, but my business instincts told me it was financially motivated. Greed is always the underlying currency of betrayal. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It had been nearly an hour since the ambulance was dispatched. I sat in the dim light, watching the green lines spike on the monitor. I was no longer just a grieving son. I was a tactician preparing the battlefield. I knew Monica would have to show up eventually to maintain her elaborate charade. She would perform the role of the traumatized daughter. I decided I would not confront her immediately. I would play her game and let her weave her web of lies. The sound of rapid clicking heels echoed down the hallway outside. I took a deep breath, smoothing my features into a mask of exhausted sorrow, and waited. The heavy glass doors slid open with a sudden whoosh, and Monica burst into the room. She was a vision of perfectly orchestrated panic. Her dark hair, usually styled with immaculate precision, was slightly out of place with a few loose strands framing her face to give the illusion of frantic distress. Her designer raincoat was unbuttoned, slipping off one shoulder, and her eyes were brimming with heavy, unshed tears. She gasped loudly when she saw the massive tangle of clear plastic tubes and thick wires connecting my elderly father to the humming life support machines. She brought her shaking hands up to her mouth, letting out a sharp, trembling sob that echoed off the cold, sterile walls. To anyone else standing in this hospital, to the tired nurses watching quietly from the corridor, she looked exactly like a deeply devoted daughter-in-law utterly destroyed by sudden family tragedy. But I was not just anyone. I was a meticulous man who had spent 40 years negotiating multi-million-dollar logistics contracts with some of the most ruthless corporate executives in the entire world. I knew exactly how to read a crowded room, and much more importantly, I knew how to read a deeply rehearsed performance. Monica did not run to the hospital bed first. She ran directly toward me. She threw her arms tightly around my neck, burying her face into my chest, shaking with violent theatrical sobs. I wrapped my arms securely around her trembling shoulders, playing my role exactly as she expected me to. I let out a heavy sigh, making absolutely sure I sounded appropriately exhausted and terrified. "Where were you, Monica?" I asked, keeping my tone incredibly gentle, laced only with a worried husband's deep concern, completely hiding the cold calculation actively churning inside my mind. She pulled back slightly, her hands gripping the lapels of my damp coat, as she looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I am so sorry, Rick. I was so terrified when they wheeled him inside. I could not bear to see him suffering like this. I felt so extremely helpless, so completely overwhelmed. I went straight up to the hospital chapel on the 4th floor. I just needed a quiet place to pray for his recovery. I lost track of time, begging God to spare him. I had no idea you had already arrived." It was a brilliant, highly plausible lie. A hospital chapel is the perfect alibi. It neatly explains her total absence from the emergency room waiting area. It explains why absolutely none of the nurses at the front desk saw her. It beautifully frames her as a deeply spiritual, sensitive woman, utterly overwhelmed by her profound love for my father. Any normal husband would have been deeply moved by such a beautiful display of faith and vulnerability. Any normal husband would have tightened his embrace, thanking his lucky stars for having such a compassionate partner during a massive family crisis. But my brain was already analyzing her statement. As she buried her face back into my chest, weeping softly against my wool coat, I closed my eyes and simply breathed in. The human sense of smell is incredibly powerful, deeply connected to memory and environment. A hospital has a very specific, undeniable scent profile. It smells of industrial bleach, sterile alcohol pads, metallic medical equipment, and harsh floor wax. A hospital chapel has its own distinct aroma, usually a mixture of old, polished wood, dusty hymn books, and the faint, lingering scent of extinguished candle wicks. If Monica had spent the last 40 minutes weeping and praying on the 4th floor, her clothes and hair should have absorbed those sterile institutional odors. But as I held my weeping wife, my senses were assaulted by a completely different olfactory profile. There was absolutely no trace of bleach or polished wood. Instead, a rich, heavy wave of expensive Cuban cigar smoke clung tightly to her designer raincoat. Underneath the thick layer of tobacco was the sharp, unmistakable aroma of aged, top-shelf Scotch whiskey. And woven through it all, lingering delicately on her neck, was the distinct, spicy note of a high-end men's cologne. A cologne that I definitely do not wear. A cologne that certainly did not belong to any hospital chaplain or emergency room doctor. The juxtaposition was staggering. She was standing in an intensive care unit, pretending to mourn a dying 102-year-old man while smelling like the VIP lounge of an exclusive downtown nightclub. She had not been praying. She had not been weeping in a quiet chapel. She had been celebrating, or plotting, or perhaps both. The realization hit my chest with the force of a physical blow. The fake hospital monitor sounds on our phone call. The 40-minute delay in arriving at the room. The scent of cigars, liquor, and another man's cologne. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly snapping into place, forming a picture so dark and twisted that it momentarily took my breath away. I realized in that split second that the woman crying in my arms was not my partner. She was a predator, but I am a predator too. You do not build an empire in the supply chain industry by acting on pure emotion. You survive by gathering intelligence, identifying the weak points in your opponent's armor, and striking only when your victory is mathematically certain. I did not pull away from her. I did not demand to know whose cologne she was wearing, or where she had actually been. I patted her back with a slow, comforting rhythm, perfectly mimicking the steady heartbeat she had tried to fake on our earlier phone call. "It is going to be all right, Monica," I murmured softly, resting my chin against the top of her head. "I am here now. You do not have to carry this heavy burden alone anymore." She let out another dramatic sob, nodding against my chest. She completely believed her performance was working. She thought she had me entirely fooled, wrapped tightly around her finger like a naive, trusting old fool. She believed her plausible lie had successfully neutralized any suspicion. But as I stared over her shoulder at the rhythmic green lines spiking on my father's heart monitor, my mind shifted entirely into a cold, tactical war room. I needed to know exactly what she was celebrating while my father was dying. I needed to know who she was with. Most importantly, I needed to figure out how this medical emergency served her hidden agenda. I gently pulled her back, cupping her face in my hands, wiping a single perfect tear from her cheek with my thumb. I looked deeply into her eyes with absolute, unwavering affection. The trap was set, but I was not the prey. I was the architect of her incoming ruin. I just needed to secure the necessary ammunition to execute the absolute perfect destruction of her carefully constructed lies. I held her gaze and simply nodded, playing the fool flawlessly, completely aware that her ultimate downfall would be a truly spectacular event to witness and control. I waited and watched. I held Monica as she continued her theatrical weeping, my mind calculating every single second that ticked by. 10 minutes passed in agonizing clarity, then 15. The rhythmic hiss of the ventilator filling my father's weakened lungs became the steady metronome for my rapidly growing suspicion. I did not let my posture betray the violent storm churning inside my chest. I simply stood there, a seemingly devastated husband, waiting for the next variable to present itself. Finally, the heavy glass door of the intensive care unit slid open, with a soft pneumatic whoosh. Dr. Arrington, the attending emergency room physician, walked into the room with a deeply grim expression plastered across his tired face. He was a serious man in his late 50s, carrying a digital tablet and exuding that specific brand of clinical detachment doctors always use when preparing to deliver devastating news. He looked at Monica, then at me, giving a small, highly professional nod. "Mr. Stanton," the doctor said softly, gesturing toward the busy hallway. "May I please have a brief word with you outside? It deeply concerns your father's preliminary test results." Monica immediately stiffened in my arms. Her tight grip on my wool coat tightened just a fraction of an inch, a tiny micro-reaction that my highly trained instincts picked up instantly. She sniffled loudly, wiping her carefully manicured eyes with the back of her trembling hand, and looked at the doctor with an expression of completely manufactured desperation. Can I hear it too, doctor? She pleaded, her voice cracking perfectly. I am his primary caregiver at the house. I absolutely need to know what is happening to him. Dr. Arrington hesitated, glancing uncomfortably between the two of us. I preempted him immediately, gently, but firmly, detaching her clinging hands from my chest. Stay right here with him, Monica, I murmured purposefully, using the soothing, authoritative tone I normally reserved for volatile corporate board meetings. Just hold his hand. I will go find out exactly what the doctor needs to say, and I will come right back in here and tell you absolutely everything. She reluctantly let go, nodding bravely, and turned her attention back to the hospital bed. I stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light of the corridor. The freezing air conditioning hit my face perfectly, matching the sudden icy chill creeping rapidly up my spine. Dr. Arrington led me several paces away from the glass door, ensuring our conversation remained entirely private from the nurse's station. He looked down at his illuminated tablet, his brow deeply furrowed in intense clinical concentration. Mr. Stanton, I need to be entirely transparent with you right now. When your father was quickly brought in, his severe symptoms initially presented as a massive cardiac event, which is frankly not uncommon for a fragile man of 102. We naturally assumed his heart simply could not sustain its normal rhythm under stress. He paused, taking a very slow, measured breath. However, our standard emergency protocol involves running a comprehensive toxicology screen on elderly patients to definitively rule out any adverse medication interactions. The rapid results just came back from the hospital laboratory. Your father did not suffer a natural heart failure tonight. I stared directly at him, keeping my facial features completely blank and unreadable. Explain that to me, doctor, very clearly. The screen definitively showed a massive, highly toxic level of a central nervous system depressant currently circulating in his bloodstream. The doctor explained, his voice dropping to a serious, hushed register. It is a very heavy, highly targeted sedative, when combined directly with the specific beta blockers and strong blood thinners your father takes daily for his known heart condition. It created a lethal contraindication. The powerful sedative artificially suppressed his natural respiratory drive, which in turn caused his already fragile heart to dangerously overcompensate and eventually crash entirely. Simply put, someone or something introduced a catastrophic chemical agent into his delicate system. The long, sterile corridor seemed to tilt slightly under my feet. My mind, thoroughly accustomed to actively managing millions of moving parts in global supply chains, immediately isolated the massive anomaly in his medical data. What specific kind of sedative are we talking about here? I asked, my voice remaining dangerously steady despite the raging inferno of realization sparking in my brain. Dr. Arrington tapped his screen rapidly. Zolpidem tartrate, but a highly concentrated extended-release formulation. It is generally prescribed exclusively for severe treatment-resistant insomnia. Given his advanced age and his existing medical chart, your father has absolutely no active prescription for this specific medication anywhere on his record. It is far too dangerous and destabilizing for geriatric patients. We are actively trying to understand how a dose this massive could have possibly entered his system. The exact name of this drug hit me with the devastating force of a speeding freight train. Zolpidem tartrate, extended-release formulation. I did not gasp. I did not stumble backward. I simply stood there, staring intently at the sterile white wall directly behind the doctor as the massive dominoes in my mind began to fall in rapid, terrifying succession. I know that exact medication. I know it perfectly well because I am the exact person who takes it. 2 months ago, after a particularly grueling financial quarter dealing with a volatile international shipping strike, I developed severe chronic insomnia. My personal physician actively prescribed me that exact heavy sedative to force my brain to finally shut down at night. But I am an incredibly cautious man. I am acutely aware of the inherent dangers of heavy prescription medication. I strictly keep my prescription bottle securely locked inside the heavy biometric safe located deep inside the master bathroom of our main house. My father lives entirely independently in the small guest house situated 50 yards completely across the sprawling manicured lawn of our private estate. He has his own daily routine, his own professional nurses who visit weekly, and his own meticulously organized daily pill organizers. He has absolutely no reason and virtually no physical ability to access my highly secured locked safe in the main residence. How did my securely locked away sleeping pills get injected directly into my 102-year-old father's fragile bloodstream? The terrifying answer materialized in my mind, cold, sharp, and intensely venomous. Monica. She is the only other living person residing in that massive house. She knows exactly where the biometric safe is located. She has quietly watched me input the manual numerical code on the very rare occasions the primary fingerprint scanner failed to read properly. My wife had not just callously abandoned my father to suffer a sudden, natural medical emergency entirely alone. She had actively and deliberately caused it. She had intentionally crushed my heavy sleeping pills, walked quietly across the dark estate to the guest house, and deliberately fed them directly into a fragile centenarian, knowing full well that his weak heart would inevitably fail under the immense toxic strain. It was not a tragic accident. It was not gross negligence. It was premeditated, highly calculated attempted murder. And she had specifically used my own personal medication to physically execute the brutal hit. The horrific brilliance of the sinister plan began to unfold vividly before my eyes. If my father tragically died tonight, the assigned medical examiner would eventually trace the lethal dose of zolpidem tartrate back directly to me. They would clearly see my legal name printed on the prescription bottle. They would see that I was the sole person legally possessing the lethal agent. To the outside world, to the investigating police, to the district attorney, it would look exactly like a tragic, fatal accident caused by an overwhelmed aging son, or infinitely worse, a deliberate illegal act of twisted mercy killing. Monica was not just trying to quietly eliminate my father from the equation. She was actively building a devastating criminal narrative. She was weaponizing my own home, my own medicine, and my own family against me. Mr. Stanton. Dr. Arrington's voice finally broke through the chaotic buzzing hum of my racing thoughts. Are you all right, sir? I know this information is incredibly difficult to process. I blinked rapidly, refocusing my sharp vision directly on the waiting doctor. I forced my rigid posture to relax purposefully, letting my broad shoulders slump just enough to perfectly mimic the heavy, crushing burden of a grieving son. I am so sorry, doctor, I murmured, rubbing my temples, as if fighting a massive headache. It is just a massive, unbelievable shock. I handle absolutely all of his medications personally. I closely oversee the visiting nurses. I simply do not understand how this could have possibly happened under my roof. We have formally notified the hospital administration, and standard legal protocol absolutely requires us to document this medical anomaly thoroughly, the doctor stated gently but firmly. We will definitely need to review his daily living environment. If there is any remote chance he accidentally ingested a stray dropped pill, we need to know immediately. Of course, I replied, my voice incredibly smooth and seemingly compliant. I absolutely need to get to the absolute bottom of this tragedy immediately. I slowly turned my head and looked back directly through the thick glass door of the intensive care unit. Monica was still sitting diligently next to the bed, softly holding my dying father's hand, staring sadly at the heart monitor, with an expression of intense, highly practiced sorrow. She genuinely thought she had successfully executed the absolute perfect crime. She actually thought she had outsmarted a man who literally built a massive global business empire by anticipating every single possible point of critical failure. She had severely underestimated the older man she married. I thanked the doctor, calmly turned deliberately away from the heavy glass door, and mentally prepared myself to flawlessly execute my tactical retreat. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped back into the sterile, humming environment of the intensive care unit. Every single muscle in my body was completely taut, screaming, with the primal urge to violently confront the woman sitting beside my dying father. But my face showed absolutely nothing except the deep, hollow exhaustion of an aging son facing an unbearable tragedy. Monica looked up at me instantly as I approached the bedside. She had fresh tears pooling in her perfectly lined eyes. She reached out, grasping my damp hand, with her warm fingers, silently playing her role to absolute perfection. I looked down at her, forcing my eyes to convey nothing but profound, shattered grief. It was an incredibly difficult performance, perhaps the hardest negotiation I have ever conducted in my entire life. I was holding the hand of the woman who had just deliberately poisoned my father, and I had to make her believe that I was entirely dependent on her comfort. "What did the doctor say, Rick?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with that manufactured, flawless vulnerability. "Is he going to make it through the night?" I let out a ragged, heavy sigh, purposefully, allowing my shoulders to slump even further under the imaginary weight of the news. "It is not looking good at all, Monica," I murmured, my voice appropriately thick with fake emotion. "His heart is failing rapidly. The doctor said his body is simply shutting down under the immense strain. They need to know exactly what his final wishes are regarding life support and extreme resuscitative measures. They need the advanced medical directive before they can proceed with any specific end-of-life protocols." I watched her face intently. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of deep satisfaction briefly crossed her features before she smoothly replaced it with a mask of horrified sorrow. She was thrilled. The medical narrative she had carefully constructed was apparently holding up perfectly in her mind. "Oh, Rick, I am so incredibly sorry," she whispered, standing up to wrap her arms around my neck once again. The smell of cigar smoke and expensive whiskey hit my senses, a putrid reminder of her calculated betrayal. I gently pulled back from her embrace, rubbing my eyes with the heel of my hand. "The problem is, I do not have the directive with me," I explained, sounding thoroughly lost and confused. "It is securely locked inside the old wall safe back at the guest house. I need to go back home to retrieve it immediately, but I absolutely hate the thought of leaving him here completely alone right now." I let the bait hang in the cold air between us, waiting to see exactly how the predator would react to an open door. Monica did not even hesitate for a fraction of a second. She reached out, gripping both of my arms with a firm, deeply reassuring squeeze. "You must go get the paperwork, Rick," she urged, her tone suddenly filled with maternal authority. "The doctors absolutely need those documents to treat him properly. Do not worry about a single thing here. I promise you I will stand guard right by his side. I will not leave this room for a single second. I will hold his hand so he knows he is completely loved and safe." She sounded so incredibly supportive, so utterly devoted. But I could clearly see the eager, unmistakable relief shining in her dark eyes. She desperately wanted me to leave the hospital. She was actively pushing me out the door. "Are you absolutely sure you will be all right here alone?" I asked, playing the hesitant, reliant husband to the very last bitter drop. "I can just call the lawyers and have them email a digital copy in the morning." She shook her head rapidly, her grip on my arms tightening in sudden panic. "No, Rick, you cannot wait until the morning. What if his heart completely stops tonight? You need the physical documents right now. Go home, drive carefully, and get the paperwork from the safe. I have everything completely under control here." I nodded slowly, offering her a weak, entirely fabricated smile of deep gratitude. "Thank you, Monica. You are a true blessing to this family." I turned and walked out of the intensive care unit, leaving the woman who had just tried to murder my father, sitting quietly beside his fragile, broken body. The moment the heavy doors closed firmly behind me, the fragile, broken old man persona instantly vanished. My spine straightened, my shoulders squared, and my pace quickened into a relentless, commanding stride. I walked rapidly through the hospital lobby, completely ignoring the sparse scattering of midnight visitors and tired nurses. The cold, logical part of my brain was already analyzing her strange, overly eager reaction. Why was she so incredibly relieved that I was going back to the guest house to open the wall safe? If she had simply poisoned him to get him out of the way, my current location would not really matter to her. In fact, keeping me sitting helplessly in the hospital waiting room would be the smartest, safest move to ensure I remained distracted and emotionally compromised. I pushed through the sliding glass doors and stepped back out into the freezing, relentless downpour. The valet quickly brought my car around, and I slid into the driver's seat, slamming the heavy door against the raging storm outside. As I merged back onto the slick, congested highway, the terrifying realization finally crystallized in my mind. She wanted me to go to the guest house. She wanted me to open that specific wall safe tonight. It was not just a convenient excuse to get me out of the hospital room. It was a crucial, necessary step in her overarching master plan. Whatever she was truly attempting to accomplish tonight required me to physically enter that guest house and interact with that safe. I pressed my foot down hard on the accelerator, the powerful engine roaring as I aggressively passed slower vehicles on the rain-soaked interstate. The wipers slapped frantically against the windshield, clearing the heavy sheets of water just fast enough to see the blurred red taillights ahead. My mind calculated the horrific variables. If the poisoning was merely phase 1 of her sinister operation, then what exactly was phase 2? She was far too calculated, far too greedy to simply kill an old man for no direct financial gain. My father had already transferred the vast majority of his personal assets to me years ago. He had absolutely nothing worth risking a life sentence in federal prison for. The target was not my father. The target had to be me. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. The $80 million supply chain empire I had spent 4 grueling decades building was the only prize large enough to justify this extreme risk. I veered sharply off the highway exit, heading straight toward the estate. The guest house was completely dark when I finally arrived. I closed the car door quietly and stood in the rain. I was entirely ready to tear this house apart to find the truth. The heavy oak door of the guest house swung open with a quiet click, letting the howling wind and biting rain briefly invade the silent hallway before I pushed it firmly shut. I stood perfectly still on the woven entryway rug, allowing the water to drip from my heavy wool coat onto the dark hardwood floor. The guest house was deeply familiar to me, a custom-built sanctuary I had designed specifically for my father to ensure his absolute comfort and independence during his twilight years. Usually this space felt incredibly warm, smelling faintly of peppermint tea, old leather-bound books, and the distinct sharp polish my father insisted his visiting nurses use on the antique furniture. Tonight, however, the air felt incredibly heavy and entirely lifeless. I reached out and flicked on the main overhead light switch. The sudden bright illumination revealed a chaotic scene carefully spread across the cozy living room. To the untrained eye of a panicked family member or a rushing paramedic, it looked exactly like the tragic aftermath of a sudden catastrophic medical emergency. A heavy brass floor lamp was knocked completely on its side, the delicate fabric shade crushed against the baseboard. The plush reading chair where my father spent his evenings was pushed aggressively out of its usual position. A porcelain teacup lay shattered on the expensive Persian rug, a dark brown stain soaking deeply into the intricate woven fibers. It was the exact visual narrative Monica had so tearfully described over the phone. She claimed she had found him collapsed on the floor, surrounded by the chaotic evidence of his failing heart, desperately fighting for air. But I have spent 4 decades inspecting massive shipping warehouses, scrutinizing complex freight manifests, and conducting rigorous quality control audits on global supply chains. My brain is fundamentally wired to instantly detect anomalies, structural inconsistencies, and manufactured evidence. I slowly unbuttoned my wet coat and stepped deeper into the silent room, analyzing the physical data presented before me. A man suffering a sudden massive cardiac event drops like a heavy stone. He does not violently throw heavy brass floor lamps across the room, nor does he aggressively shove heavy armchairs several feet across a thick carpet. I knelt carefully beside the shattered porcelain teacup, examining the dark brown stain blooming across the woven fabric. The liquid had not splashed outward in a random, chaotic pattern, which is exactly what happens when a cup is dropped from a height by a falling person. Instead, the dark liquid was concentrated in a tight, dense pool, indicating the cup had been deliberately poured out and then forcefully smashed against the floorboard. The entire scene was completely staged. It was a meticulously crafted theatrical set designed to perfectly corroborate Monica's fabricated story. She wanted the paramedics to walk in and see an obvious tragic accident, completely distracting them from asking any difficult analytical questions. My jaw tightened as I stood back up, scanning the room with cold, calculating precision. If Monica had taken the time to stage this elaborate physical deception before calling the ambulance, she was clearly looking for something specific. You do not waste precious minutes moving heavy furniture around a dying 102-year-old man unless you are actively trying to cover your tracks or obscure your true objective. I slowly walked past the overturned lamp and the intentionally shifted reading chair, my eyes sweeping over every single inch of the wood-paneled walls. My father is an incredibly disciplined man, a deeply ingrained habit forged on the brutal battlefields of the Second World War. He insists that everything in his environment must be kept in absolute perfect order. Books must be perfectly aligned on the shelves. Blankets must be folded with crisp 90-degree corners. Pictures must hang completely straight. My gaze stopped abruptly on the far wall of the study area. Hanging directly above his antique writing desk was a beautifully framed vintage portrait of his old military battalion. It was his most prized possession. And tonight, the heavy mahogany frame was hanging noticeably crooked, tilted slightly downward on the right side. My father would never, under any circumstances, allow that portrait to hang unevenly. He would have adjusted it immediately the moment he noticed it. I crossed the room with rapid, purposeful strides, my wet shoes squeaking softly against the polished hardwood. I reached out and firmly grasped the edges of the heavy wooden frame. My heart began to pound, a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs, as I gently swung the hinged portrait outward, away from the wood-paneled wall. Hidden directly behind the vintage photograph was a small modern digital wall safe. I had personally installed it for him 5 years ago to securely store his important personal documents, old military medals, and some emergency cash. The digital keypad, which usually displayed a small glowing red light, was completely dark. The thick steel door of the safe was hanging wide open. I stood there, staring into the dark, empty interior of the metal box, the final piece of the terrifying puzzle sliding perfectly into place. The safe had been completely cleaned out. Every single document, every piece of paper, every single item of value was entirely gone. Monica had not come into the guest house tonight to bring him tea or check on his comfort. She had come here specifically to breach this safe and steal its contents. The lethal dose of heavy sedative introduced into his bloodstream was never meant to be a simple assassination. The poisoning was a brutal, necessary distraction, a highly effective way to permanently incapacitate the only witness, while she thoroughly ransacked his private, secure belongings. But what exactly was she looking for? My father had transferred the deed to the guest house, his remaining financial portfolios, and his liquid assets into a secure trust managed entirely by my corporate legal team several years ago. The only items he kept inside this specific wall safe were sentimental family keepsakes and a few highly sensitive legal documents regarding his final advanced medical directives and his power of attorney. The realization washed over me like a bucket of freezing ice water. The advanced medical directives. The power of attorney. Those documents dictate exactly who has the ultimate legal authority to make critical life or death decisions on his behalf, and more importantly, who assumes massive legal control if I am somehow deemed incapable of managing the family estate. She was not just targeting my father tonight. She was actively assembling the necessary legal ammunition to launch a massive coordinated strike against my entire financial empire. She needed those original documents to maliciously alter the legal hierarchy of our complicated family structure. I slowly closed the heavy steel door of the empty safe, the metallic click echoing loudly in the quiet room. My breathing deepened, becoming perfectly steady and completely controlled. My hands stopped shaking. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and walked purposefully back out into the storm, heading toward my main house. I needed to see exactly what happened here tonight. It was time to hunt down the predators living inside my own home. I stood in the freezing rain for only a brief moment before turning my back on the ransacked guest house. I did not actually need to physically tear my own home apart to uncover the exact sequence of events that had occurred here tonight. I already possessed the ultimate tool of revelation, a quiet countermeasure I had put in place long before Monica ever decided to initiate her deadly operation. I walked briskly across the manicured lawn, my expensive leather shoes sinking slightly into the saturated turf. The massive silhouette of the main house loomed ahead of me, dark and completely silent against the stormy night sky. I bypassed the grand front entrance and used my biometric key to enter through the discreet side door that led directly into my private wing. The interior of the main house was warm, sharply contrasting the violent chill of the storm outside, but I felt absolutely no comfort as I moved through the familiar corridors. I walked straight past the grand staircase and headed directly toward my master study at the far end of the hall. This room was my absolute sanctuary, protected by a heavy solid oak door and a secondary thumbprint scanner that only recognized my specific genetic signature. I pressed my thumb against the glowing green glass of the scanner. The heavy deadbolt clicked open with a satisfying mechanical thud, granting me access to the one room in this massive estate that Monica could never penetrate. I stepped inside the dark study and locked the heavy door securely behind me. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. Instead, I walked over to the massive mahogany desk and switched on a single brass reading lamp. The warm pool of light illuminated the sleek black tower of my secure encrypted server, sitting quietly on the polished wood. 6 months ago, my father had suffered a very minor fall in the guest house kitchen. It was nothing serious, just a slight loss of balance that resulted in a bruised hip, but it had terrified me. I immediately proposed installing a comprehensive interior security system to monitor his daily movements and ensure his absolute safety. Monica had fought me on the idea with surprising ferocity. She argued vehemently about my father's right to personal dignity, claiming that placing cameras in his private living space was a gross invasion of his privacy and incredibly disrespectful to a proud veteran. Her sudden, passionate advocacy for his personal boundaries had seemed touching at the time. I now realized it was simply proactive operational security on her part. She could not execute a complex murder plot if I was watching the live feed. However, she severely underestimated my protective nature. I had completely agreed with her privacy concerns aloud. But the very next day, I quietly hired a highly specialized private security firm. They secretly installed high-definition micro cameras completely concealed inside the existing smoke detectors of the guest house. The lenses were practically invisible, providing a flawless, unobstructed view of the entire living room, the kitchen, and the hallway leading to his bedroom. All the video feeds were hardwired directly into this encrypted server in my locked study, completely bypassing the standard household network. I sat down in the heavy leather executive chair and entered my complex decryption password into the primary terminal. The large curved monitor flickered to life, casting a pale bluish glow across the dark room. I opened the dedicated security application and immediately pulled up the archived footage from the guest house cameras, specifically targeting the video files recorded over the last 4 hours. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribcage as I dragged the digital timeline cursor backward, moving past the moment the paramedics arrived, past the time Monica made her frantic phone call to me, right back to the very beginning of the evening. The video feed displayed the quiet, peaceful interior of the guest house. I watched my father sitting in his plush reading chair, a thick blanket draped over his legs, reading a book under the warm light of the brass floor lamp. It was a picture of absolute tranquility. Then the timeline reached exactly 7:15 in the evening. The front door of the guest house opened and Monica stepped inside. She was not wearing her raincoat yet. She was dressed in comfortable evening clothes, carrying a small silver tray with a steaming porcelain teacup resting perfectly in the center. She smiled warmly at my father, her lips moving in what looked like a pleasant, loving greeting. My father smiled back, marking his page and closing his book to accept the hot tea. I paused the video, zooming in closely on the high-definition image of the silver tray. Monica set the tray down on the small side table next to his chair. Then she did something incredibly subtle. She positioned her body perfectly between my father and the table, blocking his line of sight. She reached into the deep pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, folded piece of white paper. My hands clenched into tight, rigid fists as I watched her carefully unfold the paper. A small pile of finely crushed white powder rested inside the crease. It was the zolpidem tartrate. She had methodically pulverized my heavy sleeping pills beforehand, preparing the lethal dose in advance. With practiced, terrifying efficiency, she tipped the paper over the steaming porcelain teacup, letting the crushed powder dissolve completely into the hot, dark liquid. She then picked up a small silver spoon from the tray and stirred the tea gently, ensuring the heavy sedative was entirely integrated. The sheer coldness of the act was staggering. There was absolutely no hesitation in her movements. There was no shaking of her hands, no sudden flash of guilt or moral conflict. She stirred the poisoned tea with the exact same casual demeanor one might use when adding a simple spoonful of sugar. Monica turned back to my father, handing him the delicate porcelain cup with a radiant, affectionate smile. I watched helplessly through the digital screen as my father accepted the tea. He raised the cup to his lips and took a long, slow sip. He nodded to her clearly, thanking her for the warm drink. Monica simply stood there, her hands clasped politely in front of her, waiting patiently. The heavy, highly concentrated sedative did not take long to overwhelm his fragile, century-old system. Less than 10 minutes later, the catastrophic chemical reaction began. I watched my father suddenly grimace, his free hand flying up to clutch tightly at the center of his chest. His breathing became visibly labored, his chest heaving as the powerful beta blockers and blood thinners violently clashed with the massive dose of central nervous system depressants. He dropped the porcelain teacup. It hit the thick Persian rug, shattering instantly and spilling the remaining dark liquid. My father gasped, his eyes wide with sudden terror, and his body slumped heavily forward, sliding out of the reading chair and crashing onto the hardwood floor. Monica did not flinch. She just stood there, coldly checking her gold wristwatch for time. The digital timestamp at the corner of my screen ticked forward second by agonizing second. I sat rigidly in my leather chair, my jaw locked so tightly my teeth began to grind. I watched the high-definition footage of my wife standing over my dying father with an absolute terrifying calmness. My fists were clenched so hard my knuckles turned bone white against the mahogany desk. My fingernails dug painfully into my palms, but the physical sting was eclipsed by the burning inferno erupting inside my chest. Monica did not reach for her phone to dial emergency services. She did not kneel to check his failing pulse or attempt basic resuscitation. She simply stood perfectly still in the center of the warm living room, staring down at the fragile, gasping old man who had always treated her with absolute kindness. Her dark eyes were entirely empty. She checked her gold wristwatch, tapping her foot with a faint, almost bored impatience. She was waiting. The brutal realization washed over me. This was not the end of the operation. She was waiting for her backup. 10 minutes after my father collapsed onto the Persian rug, the heavy oak front door of the guest house swung open again. A tall, thinly built man wearing a dark hooded jacket and black leather gloves stepped quickly out of the freezing rain and into the illuminated hallway. He pushed the damp hood back from his face, and my stomach plummeted into an abyss of pure disgust. It was Trevor, Monica's 32-year-old son from a previous marriage. I had spent the last 8 years desperately trying to mold Trevor into a respectable, functioning adult. I had paid off his staggering mountain of gambling debts. I had quietly funded his luxurious downtown apartment to keep him out of financial ruin. I had even created a lucrative consulting position for him within my logistics company, hoping a structured environment would finally instill genuine responsibility. He had squandered every single opportunity with a profound, breathtaking arrogance, treating my immense generosity as his fundamental birthright. And now here he was, creeping into my father's home like a common thief in the dead of night. Trevor quickly wiped his wet boots on the entryway rug and walked directly into the main living room. He stopped for a brief second when he saw my father's crumpled body lying on the floor, fighting desperately for oxygen as the sedatives ravaged his failing heart. I held my breath, a foolish fraction of my soul, hoping that Trevor would show a single ounce of basic human decency. I hoped he would panic, realize his mother had gone too far, and call an ambulance. Instead, Trevor let out a quiet, muffled laugh. He actually smirked. Without a single shred of hesitation, Trevor stepped his wet leather boot directly over my father's trembling, dying body. He stepped right over the man who bought him his first car and welcomed him to every holiday dinner. It was an act of such sickening disrespect that it completely shattered any remaining illusion I held about this family. They were not just greedy. They were entirely monstrous. Trevor did not even speak to his mother. They operated with a cold synchronicity that proved this nightmare had been meticulously rehearsed for weeks. Trevor walked straight toward the far wall of the study area, completely ignoring the horrific medical emergency unfolding right beneath his feet. He reached up and aggressively shoved the vintage World War II battalion portrait to the side, exposing the digital wall safe I had installed 5 years ago. He pulled a thick, black electronic device from his jacket pocket. It looked like a sophisticated digital bypass scanner, the kind of illegal hardware you do not casually purchase. You have to actively source it. You have to learn how to use it. Trevor pressed the device directly against the glowing biometric keypad of the safe. He connected a small wire, pushing a sequence of buttons on the bypass tool. The green light on the safe blinked rapidly, flashing red, then green again. Less than 30 seconds later, the heavy steel deadbolt let out a loud mechanical click. The safe door popped open. Monica finally moved, stepping eagerly away from my dying father to join her son by the wall. Trevor reached deep inside the metal box and pulled out a thick manila folder. He opened it quickly, flipping through the dense stack of legal papers. Through the high-definition camera feed, I could clearly see the distinctive blue notary seals on the corners of the documents. It was my father's advanced medical directive and his comprehensive power of attorney. Trevor held the papers up, grinning wildly at his mother. Monica let out a triumphant sigh, clapping her hands together silently. They were openly celebrating. They had successfully stolen the legal keys to my family's entire legacy, while the patriarch of that legacy lay dying in agony mere feet away. The sheer scale of their depravity was staggering. This was not a crime of sudden passion or a desperate reaction. It was a calculated, ruthlessly coordinated hit and robbery. Trevor quickly shoved the stolen documents into the inner pocket of his dark jacket. He gave his mother a sharp, approving nod, then turned his attention back to the living room. It was time to set the stage. I watched with burning, silent fury as Trevor picked up the heavy brass floor lamp and slammed it against the baseboard, crushing the delicate shade. He walked over to the plush reading chair, grabbing the armrests and aggressively shoving it several feet across the thick carpet to make the scene look like a chaotic struggle. Monica knelt down beside the spilled tea, deliberately sweeping her hand through the broken porcelain shards to ensure the heavy sedative residue was thoroughly mixed into the damp rug fibers. They were perfectly constructing the exact visual narrative the emergency responders would expect to find. They were building an impenetrable fortress of lies around their brutal murder. Trevor checked his watch, pointed toward my father's unmoving body, and spoke a few rapid, silent words to his mother. He then pulled his dark hood back over his head, turned around, and walked briskly out of the guest house, disappearing back into the freezing storm. He had what he came for. Now it was entirely up to Monica to finish the grim performance. I watched as she stood completely still for another 5 minutes, ensuring the heavy sedative had done its absolute worst. Only when my father stopped moving entirely did she finally pull her cellular phone from her pocket. She dialed a number, holding the phone to her ear. I knew exactly who she was calling. She was calling the emergency services, preparing to unleash her flawless weeping performance for the dispatch operator. She would soon call me, playing the fake hospital sounds in the background to set her alibi, sending me rushing blindly into her trap. I sat in the dark study, my cold eyes locked on the frozen digital frame. I was no longer a grieving son. I was the architect of their impending absolute ruin. I sat in the dark study, my cold eyes locked on the frozen digital frame. I was no longer a grieving son. I was the architect of their impending absolute ruin. Up until this precise moment, I had been watching the digital security feed in complete silence, absorbing the visual horror of their actions, like a mute spectator watching a silent tragedy unfold. But I knew that visual evidence alone was only half of the terrifying equation. I needed to hear the exact mechanics of their twisted conspiracy. I reached out with a remarkably steady hand, hovering my mouse over the media player interface, and deliberately dragged the timeline cursor back a few minutes. I clicked the small speaker icon, turning the audio feed all the way up to its maximum volume. The high-fidelity microphones hidden discreetly inside the guest house. Smoke detectors crackled to life, filling the heavy silence of my master study, with the ambient background noises of the brutal betrayal. I heard the heavy rhythmic drumming of the rain pounding against the guest house windows. I heard the horrifying, wet, labored breathing of my dying father as he lay helpless on the Persian rug. And then I heard the sharp, metallic click of the digital wall safe springing open under the command of Trevor's illegal bypass device. I leaned closer to the glowing monitor, every muscle in my body pulled completely taut. Trevor reached into the dark metal cavity and pulled out the thick stack of original legal documents. He held them up under the warm light of the brass reading lamp, flipping through the heavy parchment pages with an arrogant, greedy smirk plastered across his face. "Did the old man drink it?" Trevor asked, his voice echoing through the speakers. His tone was not hushed or panicked. It was disgustingly casual, carrying the exact same inflection someone might use to ask about the evening weather. Monica was standing just a few feet away, her hands calmly folded in front of her designer cardigan. She did not even glance down at my father's trembling body. "Yes," she replied, her voice dropping into a chilling, absolute monotone devoid of any recognizable human emotion. "He drank every single drop. Call the ambulance right now, Trevor. But wait exactly 20 minutes before you actually place the call." Trevor paused, holding the stack of vital legal documents loosely in his leather-gloved hand. He looked at his mother with a faint expression of genuine confusion. "Wait 20 minutes. Why the hell are we waiting? If we delay the paramedics, he is going to croak right here on the floor. I thought the entire point was to make sure he kicks the bucket tonight." "You are not thinking clearly, Trevor," Monica snapped back, her voice suddenly sharp and laced with profound irritation. "If he dies right here on this floor, the local police will treat this as an unattended death. The county coroner will immediately take legal jurisdiction. They will initiate a mandatory autopsy, and Rick will instantly assume full legal control as the sole executor of his father's estate before we can finalize the asset transfers. We do not want him dead yet. He needs to be completely brain dead, but not totally dead yet. We need his heart beating. We absolutely need him placed on heavy, prolonged life support for the next phase of the plan." The words echoed through the silent space of my study, chilling my blood to absolute ice. My mind, trained over decades to instantly analyze complex corporate strategies, immediately dissected the terrifying brilliance of her psychopathic logic. If my father died instantly, the legal timeline would completely freeze. His final will and testament would immediately take absolute precedence, firmly locking all of his remaining assets, trusts, and properties under my direct, unyielding control. But if he survived the initial poisoning, if he was transported to the hospital and artificially kept alive on a mechanical ventilator, he would be legally classified as temporarily incapacitated. An incapacitated patient requires a designated medical proxy. An incapacitated patient triggers the immediate activation of an enduring power of attorney. Monica did not want him dead tonight. She wanted him trapped in a medically induced coma, suspended helplessly in a vegetative twilight zone. While his body was tethered to the humming machines in the intensive care unit, the newly established power of attorney would grant the designated agent unrestricted immediate access to his entire financial portfolio. They could completely drain his remaining liquid accounts. They could illegally leverage his properties. They could execute massive, irreversible financial decisions while I was theoretically paralyzed by grief and completely distracted by the ongoing medical crisis. But there was a massive, glaring problem with her twisted logic. I was already the sole designated agent on my father's legitimate power of attorney. I already held the absolute legal authority to make his medical and financial decisions. How could Monica possibly hijack a legal framework that was already ironclad and safely secured under my name? The terrifying answer played out right before my eyes on the glowing digital screen. I watched as Trevor let out a low, understanding chuckle. "Right," he muttered, nodding his head. "Life support buys us the necessary time to drain the offshore accounts." Brilliant. He reached his free hand deep inside the inner pocket of his damp hooded jacket. He did not just take the legitimate documents from the wall safe. He pulled out a second identical thick manila folder. He opened it, revealing a fresh stack of crisp legal papers. Even through the security camera feed, I could clearly see the bright, freshly stamped blue notary seals placed perfectly on the corners of the fabricated pages. He placed my father's real, authentic documents directly into his jacket pocket. Then he carefully slid the forged, meticulously counterfeited documents right into the empty digital wall safe. He closed the heavy steel door, pressing his gloved hand against the metal surface until the electronic deadbolt clicked securely back into place, locking the fake papers safely inside. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the physical switch sent a violent shockwave radiating down my spine. They had forged a completely new, advanced medical directive. They had fabricated a completely fraudulent power of attorney. And they had explicitly engineered this entire horrific tragedy to ensure that I would be the exact person to retrieve them. Monica had practically begged me to leave the hospital and return to the guest house. She wanted me to open that safe. She needed me to find those fake documents. The trap was so incredibly layered, so deeply insidious, that it genuinely took my breath away. If I blindly trusted my wife, I would have opened that safe, grabbed the folder without a second thought, and driven straight back to the hospital. I would have physically handed those forged documents directly to the attending physician and the hospital administration. By doing so, I would have personally validated their authenticity. I would have unknowingly presented the exact legal instrument that completely stripped me of my authority and immediately transferred all medical and financial control directly over to Monica. I would have handed the predator the absolute keys to the castle, locking myself out of my own father's life and effectively handing her a loaded gun pointed directly at my own family legacy. I sat perfectly still. My eyes locked on the screen as Trevor checked his watch one final time, waiting for the agonizing 20-minute delay to end before leaving my father to face the arriving paramedics. They were using my grief, my trust, and my deep love for my father as the primary weapons in their hostile takeover. They thought I was a predictable, easily manipulated old man. They thought I would play the role of the obedient, devastated husband perfectly. They were wrong. I reached out and gently closed the laptop screen. I now possessed the absolute truth, and the tactical advantage had completely shifted. I stood up from my desk, my mind coldly calculating the exact sequence of events required to burn their entire operation to the ground. They wanted a performance. I would give them a masterpiece. I stared at the glowing monitor, the harsh blue light casting long shadows across the dark mahogany wood of my private study. The digital timeline had paused right at the exact moment Trevor held the forged documents up to the brass reading lamp. I leaned forward, my face mere inches from the screen. My specialized security system utilized military-grade optical sensors capable of incredible magnification without losing a single pixel of clarity. I moved my mouse, drawing a small, precise square directly over the thick stack of papers clutched in Trevor's leather-gloved hand. I clicked the magnification tool twice. The image expanded rapidly, filling the entire monitor with a crisp, undeniable view of the bold black text printed across the top of the fabricated legal pages. The first document was not an updated will for my father. It was a comprehensive financial power of attorney. But the name printed underneath the bold heading did not belong to Harrison Stanton. It belonged to me. The second document, clearly visible beneath Trevor's thumb, was an advanced medical proxy. Again, my full legal name was printed right at the top. The profound confusion that initially gripped my chest slowly began to morph into something entirely different. Why would they need a forged power of attorney for me? My father had already transferred his assets to my secure corporate trusts over a decade ago. He owned nothing of financial value. There was absolutely no money left in his name for them to steal. I reached out and unmuted the audio feed, letting the sound of the ransacked guest house fill the quiet study. On the screen, Trevor shoved the real documents into his dark jacket and carefully placed the fakes inside the digital wall safe. He turned back to his mother, a cruel, satisfied smirk stretching across his face. "So that is it then," Trevor said, his voice dripping with arrogant confidence. "The trap is completely set. Did you make absolutely sure you used enough of the powder?" Monica stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the green digital display of the safe. "I emptied 3 entire capsules into his tea, Trevor. It is more than enough to trigger a massive catastrophic cardiac collapse within the hour. By the time the paramedics get him to the emergency room, the heavy sedative will be thoroughly integrated into his bloodstream." Trevor let out a low breath. "And you are absolutely positive this is going to work? You are sure the hospital staff will not just assume it was a natural heart attack and move on?" Monica turned to face her son, her expression hardening into a mask of pure, calculating evil. "I will make sure they find out. I will play the frantic daughter-in-law perfectly. I will casually mention to the attending physician that Rick handles all the daily medications and that Rick has been incredibly forgetful lately. Once the cops inevitably run a full toxicology screen and find Rick's specific highly restricted sleeping pills saturating the old man's blood, the narrative will write itself." She paused, taking a slow, steadying breath. "Dr. Arrington has already treated Rick for acute insomnia. Once he sees the lab results, he will instantly sign the necessary medical affidavit confirming severe cognitive decline. It will look like a horrible, tragic accident caused by an overworked, aging executive losing his mind and confusing his heavy sedatives with his father's daily heart medication." The realization hit me with the devastating, crushing force of a runaway freight train. The target of this brutal assassination was never my father. The target was me. My lungs suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. I gripped the thick leather armrests of my chair, my knuckles turning bone white as the breathtaking scale of their depraved master plan finally revealed itself. They did not just want to murder my father. They wanted to weaponize his tragic death to legally annihilate me. They were actively constructing a flawless, impenetrable narrative of severe, rapid onset dementia. They were going to frame me for the accidental poisoning of my very own beloved father. The police would look at the overwhelming physical evidence. They would see my specific prescription medication inside his failing body. They would hear Monica's tearful, highly convincing testimony about my recent memory lapses, my supposed confusion, and my deteriorating mental state. They would look at the staged scene in the guest house and assume I had wandered over there in a severe narcotic haze and mistakenly poisoned the only family I had left. Once Dr. Arrington signed the medical affidavit confirming my suspected cognitive collapse, my entire life would effectively end. I would not be sent to a standard prison. I would be legally declared mentally unfit to stand trial. I would be quietly deemed an immediate danger to myself and others, completely stripped of all my personal autonomy and permanently locked away inside a high-security psychiatric care facility. I would be trapped behind heavily barred windows, desperately screaming the truth to apathetic doctors and nurses who would simply view my frantic protests as the tragic paranoid delusions of a severely demented old man. And while I was slowly rotting away in a sterile padded room, Monica would execute the final devastating phase of her operation. She would walk into my corporate headquarters with the perfectly forged, comprehensive financial power of attorney and the fabricated medical proxy that Trevor had just planted in the guest house safe. The courts, completely convinced by the undeniable tragedy of an aging CEO accidentally killing his father, would instantly validate the documents. The judge would grant Monica immediate, unrestricted, absolute control over my entire life. She would gain 100% control of my $80 million logistics empire. She would inherit the sprawling private estate, the lucrative international supply chain contracts, the extensive offshore banking portfolios, and every single liquid asset I had spent 40 grueling years building from the ground up. She would instantly transform from a dependent, supportive wife into the absolute dictator of my vast financial kingdom. Trevor would step perfectly into a senior executive role, and they would systematically bleed my lifelong legacy entirely dry while I languished in permanent sedated captivity. The brilliance of the malicious scheme was profoundly terrifying. It was a perfectly designed, flawlessly executed hostile takeover of my entire existence. They had identified my deep love for my father as my greatest vulnerability, and they had brutally exploited it to stage my absolute destruction. They had used my own home, my own secure medicine cabinet, and my own profound grief as the primary tools of my psychological execution. I sat in the dark, silent study, the ambient glow of the computer monitor, illuminating the cold, hard lines of my face. The shock, the horror, and the agonizing betrayal that had paralyzed me just moments ago completely evaporated. Those vulnerable emotions were instantly replaced by a deep, freezing calm. The tactical war room in my mind went into immediate, absolute overdrive. They thought they were dealing with a fragile, unsuspecting old man who would simply crumble under the immense weight of a manufactured family tragedy. They fundamentally misunderstood the core nature of the man they were attempting to destroy. I did not build a global logistics empire by surrendering to ruthless predators. I built it by anticipating their maneuvers, mapping their hidden vulnerabilities, and striking back with overwhelming, inescapable force. Monica and Trevor had successfully played their opening hand. They had moved their pieces across the board with ruthless, deadly precision. But they had absolutely no idea that I could see every single card they were holding. They had no idea that their entire intricate conspiracy was currently sitting safely secured on my encrypted digital server. I reached out and slowly powered down the massive monitor, plunging the private study back into total darkness. The soft, rhythmic drumming of the rain against the windowpane felt like a countdown clock steadily ticking away. I needed to move with absolute, perfect precision. I needed to let them completely believe their sinister plan was working flawlessly. I needed to grab the fake documents, walk back into that freezing, sterile hospital with a carefully constructed mask of completely shattered grief and hand them over. I would play the devastated, forgetful husband right up until the trap snapped shut, while actively preparing the absolute ultimate counterstrike. The real game was just beginning, and I was going to ensure they lost absolutely everything. There were no tears left to shed. There was no screaming, no violent outbursts of uncontrollable anger shattering the quiet sanctity of my master study. I simply sat there in the heavy silence, staring at the darkened screen of my laptop. The profound, suffocating grief that had momentarily paralyzed me at the hospital was completely gone, meticulously folded away, and replaced by the icy, absolute clarity of a man going to war. For 8 years, I had played the role of the generous, accommodating patriarch. I had funded their extravagant lifestyles, ignored their constant petty transgressions, and desperately tried to build a cohesive family unit out of deeply flawed, greedy individuals. But that man, the trusting husband, died the exact moment Monica poured that lethal dose of sedative into the teacup. The man sitting in the leather chair right now was the ruthless, calculating chief executive officer who had spent 4 decades dismantling hostile corporate takeovers and completely burying aggressive business rivals. I reached for my cellular phone lying on the mahogany desk. It was exactly 1 in the morning. The bright digital numbers glowed clearly against the pitch-black room. I unlocked the device and dialed the first number. I did not call the local police. I did not call the hospital to frantically warn Dr. Arrington. Inviting the authorities into this deeply contaminated situation right now would only trigger the carefully laid trap. I needed my own trusted generals. I needed the loyal, brilliant architects of my personal empire. The line rang only twice before she answered. Valerie is my biological daughter from my first marriage, a fiercely intelligent, notoriously ruthless forensic accountant who inherited absolutely all of my tactical business instincts. "Dad," she answered, her voice crisp and completely alert despite the late hour. "It is 1 in the morning. What is wrong?" "Valerie, I need you at the downtown corporate headquarters immediately," I said, keeping my voice incredibly low and perfectly steady. "Go to the main boardroom on the 50th floor. Do not ask any questions right now. Just bring your primary encrypted laptop and every single financial tracking software protocol you possess." "I am leaving my house right now," she replied, asking absolutely nothing else before disconnecting the call. I immediately dialed the second number. Thomas Brentwood has been my lead corporate attorney for 25 years. He is a legal pit bull, a man who knows every single intricate loophole in federal estate law and thrives on dismantling complex financial fraud. He answered with the same sharp, instant clarity as my daughter. "Thomas, I am declaring a priority 1 corporate emergency," I stated firmly into the receiver. "Meet me at the downtown boardroom in exactly 20 minutes. We are dealing with massive coordinated fraud, attempted murder, and a hostile takeover of my entire personal estate." Thomas did not hesitate. "I am on my way, Rick." I stood up, adjusted the collar of my damp wool coat, and walked purposefully out of the dark guest house. I drove back down the winding, rain-slicked highway toward the towering skyline of the financial district. The city was completely asleep, blanketed in darkness and heavy storm clouds, but my mind was burning with intense, focused energy. I parked in the secure underground garage of my corporate building and took the private executive elevator directly up to the 50th floor. The massive glass doors of the primary boardroom slid open. The room was entirely dark except for the ambient city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the endless streaks of rain running down the thick glass panes. Within 15 minutes, the heavy wooden doors swung open again. Valerie walked in first, her sharp features set in a mask of intense professional concentration. She was wearing a dark trench coat, carrying a heavy metal briefcase. Thomas walked in right behind her, his silver hair slightly damp from the storm, clutching his thick leather legal satchel. Neither of them said a single word. They could instantly read the dark, absolute gravity etched deeply across my face. I walked directly to the head of the long conference table and connected my heavily encrypted mobile server unit directly into the massive digital projector mounted on the far wall. The large screen dropped down from the ceiling with a soft, mechanical hum. "Sit down, both of you," I commanded quietly. "What I am about to show you cannot leave this room under any circumstances. You are going to watch exactly what happened at the guest house tonight." I hit the playback button. The high-definition footage from the hidden smoke detector cameras filled the massive screen. I watched Valerie and Thomas intently as the brutal, silent tragedy played out before them. They watched Monica enter the room. They watched her casually crush my heavy sleeping pills into the steaming teacup. They watched my frail century-old father drink the lethal mixture, violently clutch his failing heart, and collapse helplessly onto the Persian rug. Valerie did not gasp. She did not cover her mouth in horror or shed a single fragile tear. The emotional detachment she possessed was truly formidable. Her dark eyes simply narrowed into 2 cold, dangerous slits. She watched Monica standing completely still, coldly checking her gold wristwatch as my father fought desperately for oxygen on the floor. Then the footage continued. Trevor entered the frame, stepping callously over my dying father, and his unmoving body. The audio feed crackled loudly through the boardroom speakers, filling the large, empty room with the sickening sound of their arrogant, victorious conversation. Thomas leaned forward, his hands steepled tightly over his mouth, as he watched Trevor pull the illegal electronic bypass device from his hooded jacket. He watched the digital wall safe click open. He watched Trevor steal the legitimate, authentic medical directives and replace them with the freshly stamped, meticulously forged documents. As Monica laid out her brilliant psychopathic master plan to explicitly frame me for severe dementia and completely hijack my $80 million estate, the deep, heavy silence in the boardroom became absolutely suffocating. The video finally concluded, freezing on the sickening image of Trevor walking out the door. I reached out and slowly turned off the projector, plunging the large conference room back into dim, rain-streaked shadows. They are explicitly trying to frame you for manslaughter, induced by severe cognitive decline, Thomas stated, completely devoid of emotion. Once the doctor signs that affidavit, Monica will activate those forged documents, seizing absolute control of your entire financial portfolio. Valerie opened her heavy metal briefcase. She pulled out her specialized laptop, booting up multiple tracking servers before the projector screen had fully retracted. "Trevor is an absolute idiot, Dad," Valerie stated coldly, not looking up. "He does not possess the intellectual capacity to successfully forge complex legal documents. Someone extremely skilled helped them. I am going to rip through his financial footprint right now. I will find every offshore account and track who printed them." Thomas pulled blank legal pads from his thick leather satchel. "We will let them walk into their execution," Thomas warned. The trap was set. The heavy silence of the boardroom was broken only by the rapid, rhythmic clicking of Valerie's keyboard. She did not waste a single second offering empty words of comfort or hollow apologies for my wife's monstrous behavior. Valerie understood that in a crisis of this magnitude, emotional reactions are entirely useless. Only hard data and calculated aggression matter. The massive digital projector screen above us remained dark, but the ambient glow from her heavy encrypted laptop illuminated the sharp, intense focus on her face. Thomas sat directly across from me, his silver pen flying across the yellow legal pad as he began drafting the preliminary injunctions, asset freezes, and counter affidavits we would need the moment we decided to spring the trap. I poured myself a glass of ice water from the crystal pitcher in the center of the table, my hands remarkably steady. The initial shock of the betrayal had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. I was no longer a husband mourning the loss of his marriage. I was a chief executive officer actively dismantling a hostile corporate takeover from the inside out. "I have penetrated Trevor's primary financial firewall," Valerie stated quietly, her dark eyes scanning lines of rapidly scrolling code. "He has always been incredibly careless with his digital footprint. He relies on basic commercial encryption to hide his offshore banking activities, which is essentially like locking a bank vault with a cheap plastic padlock. I am bypassing his secondary authentication protocols right now." I took a slow sip of the freezing water, watching my daughter work. "What are we looking for, Valerie? A man does not suddenly decide to poison a 102-year-old war veteran and fabricate complex legal documents just for the thrill of it. This operation requires significant capital, highly specialized resources, and a massive criminal incentive. Find the specific catalyst. Find the absolute root cause of their desperation." For 10 minutes, the boardroom remained completely silent. Thomas continued to write, organizing a devastating legal defense that would completely insulate my $80 million empire from any fraudulent power of attorney. Then Valerie abruptly stopped typing. She let out a low, sharp breath, her fingers hovering perfectly still over the illuminated keys. "I found it," Valerie said, her voice dropping into a deadly serious monotone. "Dad, the scale of this is staggering. Trevor did not just incur a few bad debts at the local casino. He is deeply entangled with a massive illegal offshore gambling syndicate operating out of Macau. I am looking at a series of violently escalating digital ledgers and encrypted communication logs. Over the last 18 months, Trevor has systematically borrowed against non-existent collateral. He has fabricated corporate backing, likely using our company name as a fraudulent guarantor to secure massive unsecured lines of credit. He has lost absolutely everything. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool mahogany table. Specify the exact financial deficit, Valerie. Give me the hard numbers. He currently owes them $4.2 million in principal, not including the astronomical predatory interest rates, she replied, turning her laptop screen slightly so I could see the dense, terrifying spreadsheets. But the money is not the actual problem right now. The problem is the timeline. I just decrypted a final warning message sent directly to his personal secure inbox 3 days ago. The syndicate has officially sold his debt to a highly aggressive collection firm based in Eastern Europe. They gave Trevor a strict, non-negotiable 48-hour deadline to liquidate his assets and transfer the entire balance. If he fails to deliver the $4.2 million by tomorrow morning, they are not going to take him to civil court. They explicitly stated they will send a specialized retrieval team to his downtown apartment to violently collect the debt in blood. The final pieces of the horrifying puzzle locked perfectly into place. Trevor was a dead man walking. The illegal syndicate was coming to execute him, and Monica knew it. She had watched her son dig his own grave, and in a moment of absolute blinding desperation, she had agreed to orchestrate the most horrific crime imaginable to save his pathetic life. She could not simply ask me for $4 million to pay off illegal gambling debts. I would have instantly refused and cut Trevor off completely. She needed absolute, unquestionable access to my entire financial portfolio to liquidate my assets and save her son. That is why they need the power of attorney immediately. Thomas interjected, his legal mind quickly connecting the remaining dots. They cannot wait for a standard probate court to process a last will and testament. Probate takes months, sometimes years. Trevor only has hours. A medical proxy and a comprehensive financial power of attorney bypass the entire probate system. Once the attending physician signs the affidavit declaring you mentally unfit, Monica assumes instant, unhindered control. She can legally wire $4 million to Macau before the banks even open tomorrow morning. But there is a massive structural flaw in their plan, I stated softly, my mind racing through the complex legal logistics. Dr. Arrington is a highly respected board-certified neurologist. He has treated me for simple insomnia for the past 5 years. He is a meticulous professional. He would never risk his entire medical license and his flawless reputation to sign a fraudulent affidavit, declaring me severely demented just because Monica hands him a questionable toxicology report. He would demand a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation, independent cognitive testing, and a lengthy observation period. He would never simply rubber stamp a hostile takeover. Valerie began typing rapidly again, her eyes narrowing with intense suspicion. Unless Dr. Arrington is not acting as a highly respected medical professional, she countered coldly, unless he is actively participating in the execution of this fraud. She brought up a new encrypted terminal on her screen. Let me cross-reference Dr. Arrington's personal financial records against Monica's recent banking activity. We waited in heavy silence as the forensic software tore through the digital banking infrastructure. 2 minutes later, Valerie pulled up a hidden offshore ledger. There it is, she whispered, her voice dripping with pure disgust. 2 weeks ago, Monica authorized a massive, highly secure wire transfer of $500,000 from her private discretionary account. She routed the funds through 3 different international shell companies to intentionally obscure the final destination. But the final destination is a blind trust registered in the Cayman Islands. A blind trust managed by a corporate entity that lists Dr. Arrington's current wife as the primary beneficiary. The sheer gravity of the betrayal was almost impossible to process. Monica had not just forged documents. She had actively bribed a highly respected medical professional to ensure my absolute destruction. Dr. Arrington was completely compromised. He was waiting for me at the hospital right now, ready to play his part in the deadly theatrical performance. He would look at the staged evidence, feign profound medical concern, and instantly sign away my entire freedom for $500,000. They had constructed a flawless, inescapable trap. They had weaponized my home, my family, and my trusted medical providers against me. But they had made one fatal, catastrophic error. They believed they were hunting a blind, vulnerable prey. They did not realize that I now controlled the entire board. I looked at Thomas, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. Draft the asset protection injunctions. Prepare the counter affidavits. Contact the federal authorities, but instruct them to hold their position until I give the absolute final signal. We are not going to stop them from springing the trap. We are going to let them walk right into it, lock the door behind them, and burn the entire building down. Thomas nodded, his silver pen flying across the legal pad. Valerie closed her heavy metal briefcase, her dark eyes shining with ruthless anticipation. The midnight war room had served its purpose. The counterstrike was perfectly prepared. The digital clock on the boardroom wall clicked forward to exactly 5 in the morning. The dark, stormy night outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was slowly beginning to give way to a pale, gloomy dawn. The rain had softened to a steady, depressing drizzle, but the heavy tension inside the corporate headquarters remained completely suffocating. I sat quietly at the head of the polished mahogany table, reviewing the dense stack of emergency legal countermeasures Thomas had just finished drafting. My phone, resting silently on the cool glass surface of the table, suddenly vibrated violently, the bright screen shattering the dim lighting of the room. The caller ID displayed Monica's name in large white letters. The designated 20-minute delay had officially expired. The paramedics had arrived, the scene had been assessed, and the final phase of their sinister operation was completely underway. I took a slow, deep breath, perfectly centering my emotions. I had to deliver the absolute performance of a lifetime. I had to convince a psychopathic predator that I was entirely broken, confused, and perfectly vulnerable. I reached out and answered the call, pressing the phone tightly against my ear. "Monica," I asked, forcing my voice to tremble slightly, injecting a note of deep, waking confusion into my tone. A shrill, hysterical wail erupted through the small speaker. Rick, you have to get to the hospital right now. Please God, you have to hurry," Monica cried, her voice cracking with incredibly convincing manufactured terror. The background audio was a chaotic symphony of screaming sirens, frantic medical commands, and the rhythmic, terrifying beeping of intensive care monitors. "Monica, what is going on? Slow down," I pleaded perfectly, playing the role of the disoriented, terrified husband. "Where are you? What happened to my father?" "He collapsed, Rick. I found him on the floor of the guest house. The paramedics rushed him to City General, but his organs are completely failing." She sobbed violently into the receiver, her acting absolutely flawless. "The emergency room doctors are doing everything they can, but his heart is giving out. Dr. Arrington is here. He says we need to sign the do not resuscitate orders and the emergency proxy forms immediately. The legal department will not let them perform the necessary interventions without the proper paperwork. You need to come now, Rick. He is slipping away." The cold, absolute brilliance of their strategy echoed loudly in my ear. They were not just asking me to come to the hospital. They were explicitly demanding that I sign highly sensitive, legally binding medical proxy forms while in a state of severe, uncontrollable emotional distress. They knew I would be frantic, weeping, and completely incapable of reading the fine print. I would blindly sign whatever documents they shoved in front of me, desperately trying to save my father's life. And Dr. Arrington, standing quietly in the background, holding his $500,000 bribe, would document every single moment of my manufactured breakdown. He would observe my shaking hands, my profound confusion, and my desperate, irrational behavior. He would immediately use my panicked signature on those proxy forms as definitive, undeniable medical proof of my severe cognitive decline. He would claim that my grief had triggered a massive psychotic break, completely rendering me legally unfit to manage my own affairs. The trap was perfectly, flawlessly set. I closed my eyes, summoning every single ounce of acting prowess I possessed. I let out a choked, devastated sob, letting my voice crack and break into a pathetic, helpless whimper. Oh my God. Monica. No, not my father. Please tell them to keep trying. Tell them I am coming. I stammered, portraying a man whose entire world was violently collapsing around him. Just hurry, Rick. Please hurry. Monica screamed before abruptly disconnecting the line, leaving me listening to the dead, empty dial tone. I slowly lowered the phone, the fake tears instantly vanishing from my eyes, replaced by a gaze of absolute unyielding ice. I looked across the table at Valerie and Thomas. They had heard the entire conversation on speakerphone. They knew exactly what was happening. They are moving to phase 2, I stated coldly, standing up from my executive chair and buttoning my heavy wool coat. They are actively positioning the fraudulent documents. They are ready to execute the takeover. Dr. Arrington will be waiting with the affidavit, Thomas warned, packing his legal documents into his thick leather satchel. The moment you sign anything in that emergency room, he will activate the protocol. We have the federal injunctions ready, but you are walking into an incredibly dangerous environment, Rick. I know exactly what I am walking into, Thomas, I replied, my voice perfectly calm and absolutely lethal. I am going to walk into that sterile hospital room. I am going to look my wife directly in the eyes. I am going to let her hand me the forged documents, and then I am going to spring the trap. I turned and walked out of the dark boardroom, heading straight for the private elevator. I was no longer a victim. I was the absolute master of my domain, and I was going to tear their entire world apart. The drive from my corporate headquarters to City General Hospital took exactly 14 minutes. The heavy rain had finally stopped, leaving the dark city streets slick and glistening under the glow of the amber streetlights. I parked my car in the main visitor structure, gripped the steering wheel for one final moment of absolute silence, and consciously began my physical transformation. I forced my spine to curve forward, dropping my naturally rigid shoulders into a soft, defeated slump. I slowed my breathing, letting a ragged, uneven rhythm take control of my lungs. I relaxed the sharp, focused muscles in my face, allowing my jaw to hang slightly slack, and my eyes to dull into a wide, vacant stare of profound shock. By the time I walked through the sliding glass doors of the emergency entrance, I was no longer the ruthless chief executive officer who had just mapped out the complete destruction of an illegal offshore syndicate. I was exactly the man Monica needed me to be. I was a fragile, aging husband, completely shattered by sudden, incomprehensible grief, wandering blindly into the darkest nightmare of his life. The sterile, blinding white corridors of the intensive care unit smelled sharply of industrial bleach and bitter antiseptic. The sound of squeaking rubber shoes and the rhythmic synthetic humming of medical machinery echoed loudly off the polished linoleum floors. I shuffled down the long hallway, dragging my feet, slightly clutching the lapels of my damp wool coat, as if I were freezing cold. I saw them standing outside room 412, Monica, Trevor, and Dr. Arrington. They formed a tight, perfectly staged triangle of fabricated concern. Monica spotted me first. She immediately broke away from the men and practically sprinted down the hallway toward me. Her face was a masterclass in theatrical devastation. Her mascara was carefully smudged beneath her eyes, and her designer blouse was slightly wrinkled to suggest frantic, uncontrollable panic. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face into my chest, sobbing with such intense, manufactured agony that it genuinely made my stomach turn. "Rick, oh Rick, thank God you are finally here." Monica wept loudly, her fingers digging painfully into my shoulders. "It is so bad. It is so unbelievably bad. I did not know what to do. I was so terrified." I wrapped my arms around her trembling frame, patting her back with slow, clumsy movements. "I am here, Monica," I whispered, forcing my voice to sound thick and completely breathless. "Where is he? Is he still alive? Please tell me my father is still alive." She pulled back, wiping a perfectly orchestrated tear off her cheek. "He is still breathing, but the machines are doing absolutely all the work. He is on a ventilator, Rick. His heart is barely functioning." Trevor stepped forward, placing a heavy, sympathetic hand on my shoulder. His face was set in a mask of solemn gravity, but I could clearly see the arrogant, greedy spark dancing brightly behind his dark eyes. He was looking at a man he believed he had already conquered. "We are here for you, Richard," Trevor said, his tone dripping with sickening fake reverence. "Whatever you need tonight, Mom and I have your back. Just lean on us." I nodded mutely, refusing to look directly at him for too long, afraid the pure, burning hatred in my eyes would instantly betray my facade. Instead, I turned my gaze to the third member of their unholy trinity. Dr. Arrington stood in the doorway of the hospital room, dressed in his pristine white medical coat, holding a thick metal clipboard securely against his chest. This was the man who had taken an oath to preserve human life, now actively facilitating a murder for $500,000 in untraceable offshore funds. He adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and offered me a look of deep, profound medical sorrow. "Richard, I am so incredibly sorry we have to meet under these tragic circumstances," Dr. Arrington said softly, his voice perfectly modulated to convey gentle authority. "Your wife has filled me in on the timeline of events. We have stabilized your father's immediate physical decline, but I must be completely honest with you. The preliminary toxicology screens returned some highly concerning, severely abnormal results. The chemical levels in his blood are fundamentally incompatible with his prescribed heart medications." Monica squeezed my arm tightly, stepping closer to my side. She leaned her head against my shoulder and lowered her voice into a frantic, hushed whisper designed specifically for the doctor to overhear. "Rick, honey, you have been so confused lately," she murmured, her tone laced with desperate, loving pity. "You have been mixing up your days, forgetting appointments. When I found him on the floor, there was white powder on his teacup. Rick, you gave him your heavy sleeping pills instead of his beta blockers, do you remember? You made a terrible mistake, sweetheart." The gaslighting was absolutely exquisite in its cruelty. She was explicitly planting the seed of my severe dementia right there in the brightly lit hospital corridor. She was forcing me to either accept the blame in a state of traumatized confusion or hysterically deny it, which would only make me look wildly unstable and dangerously erratic. I chose to play the broken victim perfectly. I let my mouth fall open, my eyes darting frantically between Monica and Dr. Arrington. I began to shake my head in slow, desperate denial, letting out a soft, pathetic groan. "No," I stammered, my hands rising to grip the sides of my head. "No, I would never. I check his pills every morning. I am always so careful. I would never hurt him. I do not remember. I do not understand what is happening." "It is all right, Richard," Dr. Arrington interjected smoothly, stepping forward to bridge the gap. He raised his hand in a calming, clinical gesture. "Accidents happen especially when we are dealing with extreme cognitive fatigue and chronic insomnia. We can sort out the medical anomalies later. Right now, we have a critical administrative crisis. Your father is entirely unresponsive. His brain activity is virtually non-existent. We need to make immediate critical decisions regarding his ongoing life support, and we cannot legally proceed without a designated proxy." Dr. Arrington extended the heavy metal clipboard toward me. A silver pen was clipped firmly to the top. "Monica explained that you have been struggling significantly to manage the household and the corporate finances recently due to your declining health," the doctor continued smoothly. "We need you to sign these emergency release forms immediately. They will authorize the Do Not Resuscitate order, and they will officially transfer the temporary medical and financial proxy rights directly to your wife. It will relieve you of this overwhelming burden, Richard. Just sign the papers and let Monica handle the terrible weight of this tragedy, while you get the rest you so desperately need." I stared down at the thick stack of papers clipped to the metal board. Even through my blurred, tear-filled vision, I instantly recognized the documents. They were the exact forged papers Trevor had planted in the guest house safe just hours ago. The fake power of attorney, the fraudulent medical directives. They had completely bypassed standard hospital legal protocols, relying entirely on Dr. Arrington's institutional authority to legitimize the forged paperwork right here in the hallway. I slowly reached out my fingers, trembling violently, as I grasped the cold metal edge of the clipboard. I pulled the silver pen from its holder. The physical shaking of my hands was not an act of fear. It was the immense, agonizing physical effort required to hold back the volcanic explosive wrath violently boiling inside my chest. I wanted to drive the silver pen directly into Dr. Arrington's throat. I wanted to wrap my hands around Trevor's neck and squeeze until his arrogant smirk permanently vanished. But I kept my head bowed, my posture utterly defeated. I felt Trevor shift his weight slightly, stepping closer to look over my shoulder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the undeniable triumphant smirk spread across his face. He believed he had won. Monica let out a soft, comforting sigh, resting her hand gently on my shaking arm to guide the pen toward the bottom of the page. Dr. Arrington watched my trembling fingers with clinical satisfaction, silently gathering the visual evidence he needed to justify his fraudulent medical affidavit. I held the pen hovering just a fraction of an inch above the crisp white paper, fully surrounded by the predators who thought they had completely consumed my life. I held the silver pen suspended a fraction of an inch above the crisp white paper. The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath, anticipating the final stroke of ink that would seal my fate. Monica leaned in closer, her cloying perfume masking the sharp scent of hospital antiseptic. Trevor shifted his weight, his leather shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Dr. Arrington stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the tip of the pen, waiting to claim his $500,000 bounty. I let out a long, slow breath, tasting the stale, metallic air of the intensive care unit. And then I simply opened my fingers. The heavy silver pen slipped from my grasp, striking the metal clipboard with a sharp, echoing crack before tumbling down to the linoleum floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I did not bend down to retrieve it. Instead, I slowly rolled my shoulders backward, feeling the tense, knotted muscles stretch and release. I straightened my spine, shedding the hunched, fragile posture of a defeated old man in one fluid, deliberate motion. I lifted my chin, locking my gaze directly onto Monica's confused face. The pathetic, tearful tremor completely vanished from my voice, replaced by a cold, resonant baritone that commanded absolute authority. "I think I will keep my company, Monica," I stated evenly. The fake, sympathetic sorrow on her face immediately fractured, giving way to a look of profound, paralyzing shock. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She blinked rapidly, staring at my suddenly composed, rigid posture as if she were looking at an entirely different human being. Trevor took a sudden, jerky step backward, his dark eyes darting nervously toward the hospital room doorway. Dr. Arrington cleared his throat, a sharp, nervous sound, desperately trying to maintain his clinical superiority. "Richard, what are you doing?" Dr. Arrington asked, his voice losing its smooth, authoritative cadence. "You are clearly suffering from a severe episode of cognitive dissonance. You need to sit down immediately and sign these documents so we can proceed with your father's care." I did not even grant him the courtesy of looking in his direction. My eyes remained fixed on my wife. "You are not going to proceed with anything, Dr. Arrington," I replied, my voice slicing through the heavy tension like a steel blade. "Because your medical authority in this hospital officially ended about 30 seconds ago." Right on cue, the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit swung open with a forceful, commanding crash. The rhythmic hum of the medical machinery was instantly drowned out by the sound of purposeful, heavy footsteps marching down the corridor. Valerie strode into the room first, her dark trench coat sweeping behind her, her face an unyielding mask of absolute fury and professional calculation. Right behind her was Thomas Brentwood, his leather legal satchel clutched firmly in his hand, his silver hair perfectly styled. They were closely followed by Nurse Carla, the veteran head nurse of the intensive care ward, who cast a look of pure, unadulterated disgust at Dr. Arrington. But it was the three men bringing up the rear who completely shattered the remaining oxygen in the room. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in sharp, dark suits. The gold badges clipped securely to their belts caught the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor. 3 federal agents from the Financial Crimes and Major Fraud Division spread out immediately seamlessly blocking the exit and sealing the room. Monica took a staggering step backward, her back hitting the wall with a dull thud. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with mounting, inescapable terror. Trevor shrank into the corner, his arrogant smirk instantly dissolving into a pale, sickly grimace of absolute dread. He looked like a trapped animal, his eyes scanning the sterile walls for a non-existent escape route. Dr. Arrington took one look at the federal agents and visibly swayed on his feet. His pristine white medical coat suddenly looked far too large for his shrinking frame. "What is the meaning of this?" he stammered, his voice trembling violently. "This is a restricted medical area. You cannot just burst in here." Valerie walked directly to my side, bypassing Monica, as if she were a piece of discarded garbage. She did not say a word. She simply reached into her sleek leather bag, pulled out her digital tablet, and handed it to me. The screen was already unlocked, loaded with the precise high-definition video file from my secure server. I took the tablet, turning the volume speaker up to its absolute maximum capacity. I looked at Monica, watching the color completely drain from her cheeks. "You wanted to stage a performance tonight," I said softly. "I thought it was only fair that we all sit down and watch the premiere together." I tapped the glowing play button on the glass screen. The crystal-clear, high-fidelity audio instantly filled the sterile hospital room. Trevor's voice echoed loudly, asking if my father had consumed the poisoned tea. Then Monica's voice rang out cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of human empathy. "Yes," her digital voice stated clearly. He drank every single drop. "Call the ambulance right now, Trevor. But wait exactly 20 minutes before you actually place the call." Monica let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp, her hands desperately clutching her own throat, as she heard her own murderous words broadcast across the intensive care unit. I kept my eyes locked on her, forcing her to endure every single agonizing second of her exposure. The recording continued broadcasting the devastating continuation of their plot. He needs to be completely brain-dead, but not totally dead yet. We need his heart beating. We absolutely need him placed on heavy, prolonged life support for the next phase of the plan. The sickening sound of the safe clicking open followed, accompanied by the rustling of the forged power of attorney and the fraudulent medical directives being swapped for the legitimate documents. Trevor was physically shaking his chest, heaving, as he backed himself into the medical supply cart. The undeniable concrete proof of his massive coordinated felony was playing aloud for a room full of federal agents and corporate lawyers. He slowly raised his hands in the air, a pathetic, cowardly gesture of immediate surrender. I paused the video and swiped to the next file, turning my attention directly to the sweating, pale neurologist standing frozen by the hospital bed. "And we cannot forget about your vital contribution to this evening, Dr. Arrington," I stated coldly. I tapped the screen again. This time the audio was not from the guest house. It was the digitized recording of a massive offshore wire transfer, followed by Valerie's sharp forensic voice note detailing the exact routing numbers connecting Monica's discretionary account to the blind trust managed by the doctor's wife in the Cayman Islands. Dr. Arrington's clipboard clattered to the floor, spilling the forged documents across the linoleum. The sheer magnitude of his professional and personal destruction hit him all at once. He had sold his medical license, his freedom, and his entire life for a bribe that was currently being frozen by federal authorities. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized his mind. He spun around, completely abandoning his professional dignity, and lunged desperately toward the open doorway. He did not make it past the threshold. The lead federal agent stepped smoothly into his path, raising a massive, immovable hand and shoving the doctor forcefully back into the center of the room. "You are not going anywhere, Dr. Arrington," the agent stated, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "You are officially detained under suspicion of attempted murder, medical fraud, and conspiracy to commit massive financial extortion." I handed the tablet back to Valerie. I looked at the three people who had spent the last 8 years living under my roof, eating my food, and spending my money, only to orchestrate my absolute execution the moment Trevor's gambling debts caught up with him. They were no longer dangerous predators. They were broken, pathetic criminals waiting for the steel jaws of justice to snap completely shut. Nurse Carla stepped forward holding up a small plastic vial containing a dark red blood sample. We intercepted the initial blood draw before it reached the main laboratory. Mr. Vales, she stated firmly, glaring at Dr. Errington. We secured the untainted samples. His fraudulent toxicology orders have been entirely overridden. Your father is receiving the correct counteractive protocols right now. His heart rate is stabilizing. I felt a massive crushing weight finally lift from my chest. My father was safe. The fortress of lies Monica had built around him had been completely demolished. I turned my attention back to my wife. She was sliding slowly down the wall, collapsing into a miserable weeping heap on the hospital floor. There were no fake tears this time. This was the raw, ugly reality of absolute defeat. Thomas stepped forward, opening his leather satchel and pulling out a thick stack of freshly printed legal injunctions. He dropped them unceremoniously onto Monica's lap. Your access to all corporate and personal funds has been completely severed, Monica Thomas stated with lethal professional efficiency. Your personal accounts are frozen. The offshore transfers have been intercepted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You currently possess absolutely nothing. I stood over her, looking down at the woman I had once promised to love and protect. You wanted my empire. Monica, I whispered, my voice echoing in the quiet aftermath of the storm. But you forgot one crucial detail. I built this empire by destroying people far smarter and far more dangerous than you. I turned my back on her and looked at the lead federal agent. The performance is over, I said quietly. Take them all away. The moment the lead federal agent issued the command, the chaotic reality of their situation finally shattered the last remaining fragments of their arrogant delusion. Two agents lunged forward. They bypassed Dr. Errington, who was currently hyperventilating against the medical cart, and moved directly toward the far corner of the room. Trevor took one look at the metallic glint of the handcuffs and completely abandoned his mother. The criminal mastermind, who stepped over my dying father, instantly dissolved into a weeping coward. He pressed his back against the sterile wall, throwing his hands to shield his face from approaching officers. It was not my idea, Trevor screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate shriek. It was all her. She planned everything. She bought the sleeping pills. She crushed them up. She forced me to find the bypass device for the safe. I just did what she told me to do because of the gambling debts. She is the one who poisoned the old man. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I swear to God it was all her idea. Do not arrest me. You have to arrest her. Monica turned her head slowly, staring at her biological son, with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. The ultimate betrayal sliced through her manufactured facade, replacing her calculated performance with genuine, profound panic. Her own flesh and blood had instantly offered her to the wolves to save his own pathetic skin. The sheer velocity of the collapse sent her tumbling to the floor. Monica fell hard onto her knees, tearing her trousers against the cold tiles. She ignored the agents securing Trevor's wrists. She ignored the doctor sobbing quietly by the door. She crawled frantically across the floor, dragging herself toward my polished leather shoes. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands, trying to grab the hem of my damp wool coat. "Rick, please, you have to listen to me," she wailed, genuine tears finally streaming down her face, ruining her flawless makeup. "This is a massive misunderstanding. You are not thinking clearly. The stress of your father falling ill has clouded your judgment. I did this for us. I did this to protect our family from bankruptcy. Trevor was going to be killed by those horrible men. I was terrified. I was just trying to keep us all safe. Please, my love, you know my heart. You know I love you. Tell them to stop this right now. Please tell them to let us go." I stood perfectly and completely still, a solitary pillar of solid granite, amidst the thrashing storm of her desperation. I did not move my foot away, nor did I reach down to offer her the slightest bit of comfort. I simply stared down at her weeping, pathetic form, with a gaze devoid of mercy, warmth, or forgiveness. She was a venomous serpent begging for sympathy after completely draining its fangs into my spine. I offered her nothing but silent, absolute judgment. I slightly turned my head and gave a brief, sharp nod to my lead corporate attorney. Thomas Brentwood stepped forward smoothly. He simply opened his heavy leather satchel and pulled out a thick, meticulously organized stack of freshly printed legal documents. He tossed them casually onto the edge of my father's hospital bed, letting the heavy parchment papers slide across the crisp white sheets right in front of Monica's tear-stained face. "These are your absolute final realities," Monica Thomas stated, his voice ringing with cold, clinical authority. "The top document is a signed and executed emergency divorce decree filed under the undeniable grounds of attempted murder and massive financial fraud. You are no longer legally married to my client. The second document is an immediate permanent eviction notice for the luxury downtown apartment currently occupied by your son. Trevor has exactly 0 hours to vacate the premises, as the property has already been seized by corporate security. The third stack contains the federal asset freeze authorizations. Every single bank account, every offshore trust, every credit card, and every single discretionary fund attached to your name or your social security number has been completely disabled. You cannot access a single penny of Richard's money. You cannot hire a defense attorney using his capital. You have been completely severed from the estate. You are entirely, financially annihilated." Monica stared blindly at the thick stack of devastating legal papers, her mouth opening and closing, like a suffocating fish pulled violently from the water. Her hands dropped uselessly to her sides. The overwhelming magnitude of her complete defeat finally crushed the remaining breath from her lungs. She had wagered my entire family legacy to save her son, and she had lost absolutely everything. She was financially destitute, facing decades in a federal penitentiary, and the son she had sacrificed her soul to protect had just traded her freedom for a futile chance at leniency. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, firmly grabbing Monica by the shoulders and pulling her roughly to her feet. She did not resist. Her body was completely limp, drained of all the arrogant, poisonous energy she had wielded just 10 minutes prior. Another agent moved in swiftly, pulling her arms behind her back, the sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly against the sterile hospital walls, sealing her total destruction. The agents began to aggressively drag Monica and Trevor toward the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit. As they pulled Monica past me, her vacant, tear-streaked eyes met mine one final time. She looked desperately for a single trace of the gentle, accommodating husband she thought she had successfully manipulated for 8 years. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, completely invading her personal space. I leaned my head down, bringing my face mere inches from her trembling ear. The chaotic noise of the hospital room seemed to instantly fade away, leaving only the cold, sharp whisper of my voice. "You thought a man who tracked billions of dollars in highly secure freight across the globe would not meticulously count his own specialized sleeping pills," I whispered, ensuring every single word cut deeply into her shattered mind, like shards of broken glass. "You severely underestimated the true depth of my vision, Monica. You picked the absolute wrong old man to declare legally blind." I slowly and deliberately pulled back, standing perfectly straight as the agents hauled her out into the sterile corridor. The heavy doors swung shut with a firm, satisfying thud, instantly cutting off the pathetic sounds of Trevor's endless sobbing and Monica's devastated wails. The suffocating darkness that had invaded my entire life was finally gone. I turned my focused attention back to the center of the room. Valerie was already quietly typing on her secure tablet, coordinating the final corporate asset sweeps. Thomas was neatly packing away his legal files. And lying peacefully in the hospital bed, surrounded by the humming of the restorative medical machinery, my father took a deep, steady breath. The poison had been completely neutralized. The hostile takeover had been crushed. My empire was totally secure, and the predators were finally locked away in the dark. 2 weeks have officially passed since that long, chaotic night in the intensive care unit. The heavy storm that threatened to completely destroy my family has finally passed, leaving behind a clear, brilliantly bright sky. I am currently sitting in the master study of the guest house, the exact room where Monica executed her desperate gamble. The afternoon sun is streaming through the large bay windows, casting a warm golden glow across the antique Persian rug. Across from me, sitting comfortably in his favorite leather armchair, is my father. Harrison is a truly formidable fighter. You do not survive the brutal trenches of the Second World War, only to be taken down by a greedy woman with a handful of crushed sleeping pills. His century-old heart, which had slowed to a perilous crawl that night, is beating with a strong, steady rhythm. The doctors were absolutely astounded by his rapid recovery, but I was not. I know the unyielding steel that runs through his veins. We are in the middle of a highly competitive game of chess. He just moved his knight across the polished wooden board, capturing my bishop with a quiet, triumphant chuckle. I smile, taking a slow sip of aged scotch from my crystal glass. The profound peace in this room is a stark contrast to the absolute devastation unfolding downtown. Monica and Trevor are currently sitting in separate, heavily guarded federal holding cells. They have both been denied bail, deemed extreme flight risks, given the severe magnitude of the international wire fraud and the violent nature of their attempted murder charges. The prosecuting attorneys have meticulously built an impenetrable, airtight case. Between Valerie's flawless forensic digital trail, the crystal-clear audio and video recordings from the hidden cameras, and the intercepted offshore banking transfers, there is absolutely no room for a defense. They are both facing a minimum of 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The illegal offshore syndicate in Macau, furious at losing their $4 million bounty, has reportedly been sending aggressive messages to Trevor's frozen accounts. He is significantly safer in a federal cell than he would ever be on the streets. Monica, stripped of her designer clothes, her luxury vehicles, and her manufactured social status, is finally facing the cold, terrifying reality of the life she chose. She attempted to contact me twice through a court-appointed public defender, begging for a plea deal or a simple conversation. I explicitly instructed Thomas to deny all requests. She ceased being my wife the moment she poured that poison into my father's cup. As for Dr. Arrington, his spectacular downfall was immediate and absolute. The medical board instantly and permanently revoked his license. Facing a lengthy prison sentence for medical fraud, conspiracy, and attempted manslaughter, he immediately chose to fully cooperate with the federal investigators. He provided them with a massive trove of documents, exposing a long history of accepting lucrative bribes to manipulate medical records for wealthy, impatient beneficiaries. His cooperation might save him from dying in a prison cell, but his reputation, his career, and his entire legacy have been permanently reduced to cold, worthless ashes. The local newspapers have been running front-page stories detailing his corruption, ensuring he will never step foot inside a hospital again. My own legacy, however, has never been more secure. Yesterday morning, I invited Valerie to the corporate headquarters. We sat in the very same 50th floor boardroom where we had planned our defensive strike. I did not offer her a simple bonus or a brief promotion. I directed Thomas to execute a permanent, irrevocable transfer of exactly 50% of my entire global logistics empire directly into her name. She did not cry or offer excessive emotional thanks. She simply looked me directly in the eye, shook my hand firmly, and immediately began outlining a brilliant, aggressive strategy to expand our shipping routes into the European market. She is a brilliant tactician, a fiercely loyal daughter, and the absolute rightful heir to my life's work. I protected my bloodline, and I secured my true family's future. The transition of power will be seamless, ensuring that the company continues to thrive long after I eventually decide to fully retire. I take another sip of my scotch, letting the smoky warmth settle deeply in my chest. I look out the window at the sprawling green estate I built with decades of relentless dedication. The air is clean, the house is quiet, and the predators have been permanently removed from the garden. The heavy burden of managing a fractured, ungrateful household has been completely lifted from my shoulders. I no longer have to pretend to be a blind, accommodating patriarch. I am simply a man enjoying the hard-earned fruits of his labor, surrounded exclusively by those who have proven their absolute worth. My father reaches across the board and resets his pieces, smiling warmly. I nod, placing my glass down, entirely ready for the next round. The game of life continues, but the board is finally mine. The past 8 years feel like a distant, faded nightmare that no longer holds any power over my mind. Every single morning I wake up with a renewed sense of purpose and a profound appreciation for the peace I have reclaimed. I spend my days reviewing strategic corporate acquisitions with Valerie and my evenings enjoying quiet dinners with my father. The treacherous illusion of a happy marriage has been replaced by the solid, unbreakable reality of genuine loyalty. I have successfully defended my empire against the most insidious threat imaginable, an enemy operating from within my own home. I survived their malice, dismantled their trap, and completely neutralized their greed. They believed my generous nature was a glaring symptom of profound weakness. They fundamentally misunderstood the core architecture of my character. I provided for them out of love, but I destroyed them out of absolute necessity. The massive empire I forged will relentlessly continue to expand, guided perfectly by the highly capable hands of a daughter who truly understands the critical value of hard work and unwavering dedication. We will firmly move forward without ever looking backward at their ruin. My life's legacy is finally undeniably secure and entirely safe from their deeply toxic influence. Never mistake a quiet, accommodating older man for a foolish one. Men who spend their lives building massive empires, providing for their families, and weathering vicious storms do not lose their tactical edge just because their hair turns gray. Greed invariably makes people sloppy, leading them to underestimate the very hands that feed them. True power is not about screaming, breaking things, or throwing a frantic tantrum when betrayed. True power is stepping silently back into the shadows, meticulously gathering your ammunition, and striking only when victory is absolute. Family is defined by loyalty, not just marriage certificates or blood. Have you ever discovered a shocking betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How exactly did you handle it? Drop your personal story in the comments section below, and please do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more gripping, true stories about life, loyalty, and ultimate justice.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.